Hello. In the last few podcasts that I've done, I've been talking about the benefits of volunteering and how it's a different way of getting access to wildlife, but in many ways a more kind of personal, more unique way of getting access to wildlife. And in this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about my first real experience of that, which was back in 1993. And that was when I did an Earthwatch project helping some researchers who were working off a small island off the Dampier Archipelago, which is roughly two-thirds up the west coast of Australia. And that was Kurt and Mich Jenner. And at the time, they were in their second season, I think it was, of doing humpback whale research in the area. They just got married. They were recently married. And really a few things leapt out at me from that whole experience. First of all, it was just great getting to know them and spending time with them, because there were six of us on an island for 2 weeks. So there was Kurt and Mich and 4 volunteers. So I was there. There was a lady from the UK who was with them for a few month or two, I think. A lady from Australia and a guy from the States. And we basically helped out. We would go out, 4 of us in their small rib. Rib is a rigid hull inflatable boat, so it's one of the smaller boats. And the other 2 people would stay on the island and do work that had to be done on the island. So I got paired with Kurt, and when the other guys were out, photographing whales, observing behaviour, and I'll talk about what they were doing in a moment. We would be, I remember one day we went out fishing to try and catch dinner. And to cut that story short, we finished up eating some of the canned food that night, so we didn't do terribly well. And we did also nip out and dig a new latrine, because it was pretty basic living there. So the reason I'm sharing this story is that it was a great opportunity to spend, 2 weeks is a long time to spend with a couple of people and look at them doing what they're passionate about, which was finding out about humpback whales. And the reason they were there was that at that time, so back in 1993, nobody really knew where the calving grounds were. So if you're not familiar, humpback whales are baleen whales, and they have a migratory path and a migratory pattern. So in broad terms, they spend the southern hemisphere populations, they spend the summer in Antarctica, where they'll generally be feeding. And because they're feeding and defecating, they're kind of feeding their own ecosystem a little bit. But then at the end of the summer, they will begin to head north, and they'll go past, in fact, they go either side of Australia. So they're actually slightly different populations that go. One goes up the west coast, which is the group that I was interested in on that occasion, and the other group goes up the east coast, and also includes New Zealand in their migration. And what they do, they get up to warmer water, the sort of tropical, subtropical water, and that's where they calve and they mate, and they have that whole cycle there. And one of the reasons they do that is that when the calves are born, they don't have any blubber or very little, so they can't be born in colder water. It'd be very difficult for them to survive. So they go up there to have their calves, and then obviously the calves can survive in that warmer water. And often during the migration, the whales don't feed very much. There's opportunistic feeding. And I was reading recently about some humpback whales being seen bubble fishing near Sydney, which is, I think, only twice in about 20 years that's been observed. And bubble fishing is where they will get underneath a large group of fish, and they will swim in a circle underneath the fish while they exhale. And obviously that puts out what develops into a curtain of bubbles around these fish. So it hems them in to this curtain of bubbles. And then one of the whales will go up through the middle of the curtain of bubbles, and basically with its mouth open, and get a mouthful that way. So that's one of the ways they feed. But generally on the migration, they're not feeding very much. And one of the things I've observed, and people who do a lot of whale watching will have observed, that is that when they see the whales coming south again at the end of the migration, as they're heading back to Antarctic waters for the summer, they're noticeably thinner than they were on the way up. So you can see the vertebrae in their back much more clearly. So anyway, the reason that Kurt and Mich were in this place, Enderby Island, is where they were located at the time, is that nobody knew where the population that went up the west coast of Australia actually calved. They didn't know where the calving grounds were. So what Kurt and Mich were doing was really to try and identify individual whales and work out where they were going. And the way that was done back then, so we had a GPS, but it was a very early version. So you kind of got to think back that things were nowhere near as automated and sophisticated as they are now. So we would physically be making notes in the boat about the time of day. We'd jot down the GPS position. We'd write down what behaviors we were observing. And the photo identification sequence was essentially us trying to get either side of the whale so that we could photograph the dorsal fin from both sides, because the dorsal fins in humpbacks tend to vary quite a lot in their shape. And also we would try and get behind the whale so that we had a good view of the underside of the flute, that's the tail, as it lifted up when the whale dived down. So that was pretty critical, because the fluke in particular is very key in identifying an individual whale. And then all of these photographs and the observational data and the timing and all of that stuff would be sent into a database, which was a worldwide database of whales. And then these individuals would be laboriously kind of compared with other observations to see if they could identify a particular whale out of all of these hundreds of whales that were being photographed, to start to plot where they were at different times and to give some idea of what their range was. Did the different populations intermix and all this stuff? So that was essentially what we were there for. And the reason that I mentioned this is that as my first experience doing this kind of volunteering, it was a real eye-opener for me, because I don't know, I very glibly thought that we knew most of what we needed to know about most animals. And in fact, that's in many ways couldn't be further from the truth. We're learning all the time. And I was even reading a comment from Kurt recently, because Kurt and Mich are still doing research. They actually have their own ice-rated vessel now, so they can range in a much wider area, and they've been down to Antarctica a number of times, and they're very heavily involved still in whale research, but they're also really highly regarded. So back in 2017, they received a Lifetime of Conservation Award from Australian Geographic, and then in the 2018 New Year's Honours List, they were both awarded both became members of the Order of Australia. So that's a huge accolade for their work. And the comment that Kurt made was that after 30 years of doing humpback whale research, he was still learning things. And I think that's really the big thing about volunteering. So bringing it back to the benefits of volunteering is that everybody's learning, even the scientists or the people who are leading the research. The reason they're researching is that we're still always trying to find out more. It may be about the habits of the animal, it might be where they go, it might be the impact of environmental changes on them. And things like humpback whales, they're important because they're at the top of their particular food chain. They in one sense, are in the top of their environment. So what happens to them in terms of their health it gives clues about what's happening to everything else below them, because obviously if you have the sort of bottom of the food chain suffers, that ripples all the way up to the top. So by observing these top predators, if their numbers begin to decline, well, there are good reasons for that, and it may not be the most obvious thing. It could well be that something is happening further down the food chain, and that's then affecting everything above that particular animal. So that was one of the things. So it was a real eye-opener for me to begin to get some idea of just how little we knew about humpback whales at that time. And we know an awful lot now. We know a lot more now, and a good deal of that is due to the work that Kurt and Mich have done in their lives, in their careers. So I'm really proud to have been a very small part of helping them through volunteering, particularly at such an early stage in their research, because I feel in a small way I've contributed to helping them along their way, as has everybody else who has volunteered with them. And I know that there's quite a lot of people who have volunteered with them, and we had a really good time. And they're a great couple, lovely people, and I bumped into them again when I was riding around Australia in '97. I'd actually got to Perth and had gone down to Fremantle and was wandering around the boatyards or just past them, and then I saw a boat there that I recognised from photographs. It was a boat called Whale Song, and it was actually a catamaran they'd built themselves. And I remembered it because I was still in touch with them while they were building the boat, and had contributed a little bit of money to go towards it. So I just wandered into the boatyard and walked around to Whale Song and said hello, kind of called hello, and Kurt was on board, and it was brilliant. I went on board, had a chat to him. Mitch was out with they got two girls who were quite young at the time back then, and caught up with them for dinner a day or two later, which was just lovely. So it's really nice to have those connections with people who are not only great people to be around anyway, but they're really pushing forward the boundaries of our knowledge and understanding of the natural world. So that's one of the big thrills, I think, of volunteering. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know who you're going to meet, excuse me, and the impact that they're going to have through their work in their area, and also more generally in how we understand these different animals. So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes telling you a little bit more about what we were doing on the island as well, or sharing a bit more of the experience. So I can't show you a picture of it, but basically Enderby at the time was uninhabited. It was just left. It was actually a reserved area. You couldn't just stroll up and park your boat and go off and do a bit of fishing or whatever you wanted to do. It was restricted access, and there was one building on the island, and that was our kind of home office. So it was I'm just trying to, I guess it was kind of rectangular, and you'd go in at one end of the rectangle, one of the smaller sides, and in there we had some workbenches. There was a refrigerator, I believe, was inside, and that was where we would do work with the very early PCs that we were using back then. Outside we had a generator, and there was a pergola around the whole of the building, and that's where our beds were. So we would sleep out in the open. So it was like sleeping on a veranda, if you like, that kind of thing. And that was actually great fun. I think one of the people did actually pull their bed outside the veranda so they could just sleep under the stars in some degree of comfort. I got a feeling it rained that night. But anyway, we had that kind of opportunity, though. It was really nice to be in that environment. And then we would go for walks around the island if we weren't working. We were usually out every day, but there were days where we couldn't go out because the winds would get up a little bit, and it was a little bit sheltered where we were in the islands because it's an archipelago. So that obviously means that there were other islands around. And we would just head out in the rib. We would actually have that parked a little way offshore. It was tied up to a buoy, and we'd have a tinny, an aluminium kind of rowboat that we would use. And that simply meant we wouldn't bring the rib all the way in because we had an outboard motor, and because it was quite shallow, quite a shallow beach, we didn't want to get the outboard into the ground. So we would tend to use the tinny. So Kurt would be in charge of rowing usually, and he always said he was very toned at the end of a research season. So that was the kind of environment we were in, and we had fresh water, but it was only used for drinking. So everything else, washing the dishes, washing ourselves, we did with salt water. And I remember going to get saltwater soap before I went over to Australia to volunteer. And I have to say, I don't know if you've ever used saltwater soap. My experience of it is it leaves you feeling very sticky. And so for 2 weeks, basically, I felt very sticky every time I washed. When we did finally complete the 2 weeks, and it was a great time. I mean, it was just such an amazing experience. Kurt and Mich took us back to the mainland. So we went to Dampier. And I remember going to the airport because I was flying off somewhere else after that, and the three of us, I think, were leaving at the same time, if I remember correctly. and we were all at the airport at I think it's Karratha Airport. So it's a tiny little airport in the northwest of Australia. It's more built up now because in the 2000s with the mining boom, when China started buying a lot of iron ore from Australia, that whole area is all about iron ore. And I think I'm right in saying Dampier was a closed town at the time. So if you didn't work for, I think it was Hemsley Iron Ore, you weren't even allowed in the town. It was just that sort of setup. So very heavily involved in mining, but quite a small town. So the airport was very small, and I do remember the three of us went off to the airport because we were flying off to wherever we were going after that. Because from that area, you fly down to Perth usually, and then you've got connections elsewhere. But we took it in turns to have a shower, and we had, I tell you, this is the best shower of my life, because after 2 weeks of feeling constantly sticky and washing in seawater, it was just something else to be in a nice hot shower and be able to just feel really clean again. And all of us had really long showers, and the other people would be just sat outside looking after our bags and things. So that was quite fun. So anyway, that's really, I guess, what I wanted to share on this one. It's a shorter podcast than some of the others that I've recorded. But I think, I guess I wanted to share a little bit more about my passion for volunteering and why I think it is such a great way of experiencing something else. So obviously you can volunteer for all sorts of things. It might be wildlife, it could be conservation, it could be teaching of some sort. Certainly from the people I've spoken to, I think most people I've spoken to who volunteered have had a really good time, and it's been an eye-opener for them in different ways, not only in what they've learned, but maybe in things they've done. They've done things they wouldn't normally do. They've learned things about themselves in the process. So I do most definitely recommend that as something to think about. And as I've said, it's, if you do volunteer and you're helping in an area that's doing research, you could well be contributing through your observations and maybe insights or anything that occurs to you that helps scientists. You can be contributing in your small way to helping us as a community and as an international community understand more about the world around us. So I'm going to stop talking now. It's a little bit shorter than the previous ones, but hopefully that's given you a bit of food for thought. You can find out more about what I do as a wildlife photographer and also supporting conservation on the website. So that's www.creativephotographyacademy.com. There's a lot there. That's mostly about training, but if you there's also a little bit about my wildlife photography and the prints that I do from wildlife, and then some of the proceeds are going to support a couple of projects at the moment. So one of them is EHRA in Namibia, which is Elephant Human Relations Aid, and the other one right now is Half Cut, which is a group based in Sydney who are buying up chunks of the Daintree rainforest and basically once they're bought, those areas of those parcels of land are not developed any further. So Jimmy Stanton Cook runs all of that with his partner, and those guys do an amazing job. They're great people, really enthusiastic, and they're doing their best to preserve our ancient rainforest, which again is another amazing environment, but it's unfortunately in many areas just being wantonly destroyed, and it's just a real shame. So there you go, just some thoughts to leave you with. I hope you have a great day, whatever you're doing rather, and I will speak to you again in another podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.